What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Lawrence Okolie, 17 wins and 0 losses, defending his WBO Cruiserweight title against Michal Cieslak. 21 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest. Lawrence Okolie is one of the bigger names or rising stars that are fighting on Matchroom DAZN. He's kind of, becoming a premier fighter, stepping out of the shadow of his good friend Anthony Joshua, fellow Nigerian Brit. Lawrence Okolie's fought on several Anthony Joshua undercards. He fought on the Joshua versus Carlos Takam undercard. He fought on the Joshua versus Povetkin undercard. Joshua versus Pulev. His most recent fight against Dylan Prozovic in September 2021 was actually on the Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk undercard, where Joshua lost his belts to former undisputed Cruiserweight Champion Alexander Usyk. So Okolie, it's interesting. He's fought his last 11 fights in London, like not only in England, which I don't need to get into any sort of a European history. There's England, and then within the UK, there's Scotland, Ireland, Wales. Well, so Okolie has fought his last 12 fights, not only in the UK, which is a general landmass consisting of a few countries, not only the nation England, but within that nation of England, the city of London. I can't think of too many up and comers who are able to fight all of their step-up fights, including the fight where they fought for the title. Like when Okolie fought former WBO Cruiserweight champ Krzysztof Glowacki for a vacant WBO Cruiserweight belt. Even though Glowacki was the former champion, even this fight was fought in London, England. Kind of interesting if you look at his fight-by-fight location. But yeah, Okolie is pretty much like a rising star. He just earned a belt, the WBO Cruiserweight belt. He's a big favorite over Michal Cieslak right here. He's like a minus 800, whereas Cieslak is probably like a plus 500, thereabout. So significant favorite, especially for going against somebody who, Cieslak has only 1 loss. But Okolie has won 14 of his 17 wins via knockout. So his last 10 fights, I believe, have all ended in stoppage, TKO or knockout. You'd have to go all the way back to 2018 to find somebody who went the distance with him. Now, granted, he hasn't been fighting, all of the top 10 cruiserweights, although, again, Glowacki was a former champion, but he was actually supposed to fight Glowacki earlier during the COVID pandemic. They were supposed to fight in December 2020, but Glowacki had tested positive for COVID, and then Okolie ended up fighting Jasevsky on short notice, and he stopped him in the second round. Then he went on to fight Krzysztof Glowacki, who, at the time, his only losses came against Alexander Usyk. That's how Glowacki lost his WBO Cruiserweight title, was to Usyk back in 2016. He then won several more fights, including beating Maxim Vlasov, which, if you remember, is the guy who gave Joe Smith a hell of a fight for that vacant belt that Joe Smith now holds. Glowacki had beaten Vlasov, and this was in 2018, and then in his very next fight, he loses to Mairis Breidis. Mairis Breidis, if you ask me, the best fight that could be made right now in Cruiserweight would be Lawrence Okolie versus Mairis Breidis, or you could say Mairis Breidis versus Lawrence Okolie, because it's Mairis Breidis who is a 2-time champion in the division. Mairis Breidis had won the WBC title, and then Mairis Breidis lost that belt against Alexander Usyk in that World Boxing Super Series, which, damn, doesn't it seem like all roads end in losing to Alexander Usyk? The guy's a true badass. But yeah, Mairis Breidis versus Lawrence Okolie, in my view, is the best fight that could be made at Cruiserweight. So Lawrence Okolie's been working up the ranks, beating a whole bunch of, outmatched opponents. Okolie's very tall. He's 6'5" with a long reach. We're talking 82.5-inch reach. If you MMA fans want a related parallel, John Jones is 6'4" with a 84-inch reach. Okolie, 6'5", 82.5-inch reach. So Okolie WBO champion, really operates behind a jab. He is super jab heavy. In fact, online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer believes that Lawrence Okolie has one of the best jabs in the sport, just pound for pound. A premier jab where, if I'm looking at this Okolie versus Cieslak fight, the thing is Cieslak himself is a pretty tall fighter. He's 6'3". He usually has a height advantage over his opponent. So I wonder how Cieslak, one, is even going to get around Okolie's jab. But yeah, Okolie versus Glowacki for that vacant WBO Cruiserweight title was supposed to be like a big step up for Lawrence Okolie. But I, like many others, were just pretty baffled by how flat-footed Glowacki seemed. Like, he used to be very good. He's a shorter fighter somewhat for the division. He's 6 foot even, but he's really good at like crashing the pocket and letting his hands go with combinations. And he just wasn't able to find any opportunities to get in on Okolie. Okolie was truly just keeping him at arm's reach, which if you're a 6-footer fighting a 6'5" Okolie, you have little to no chance at winning from the outside, especially if Okolie, as I mentioned, has an outstanding premier jab. So Glowacki's just getting picked apart from the outside. He's looking for like 1 or 2 punch opportunities to kind of put his head down and throw a haymaker, try to land something big. But it became apparent like by the 3rd, 4th round that, hey man, he's having a hell of a time. And now Lawrence Okolie is able to mix in, along with the jabs, combinations to the body. Like, he was able to really drop his hands low and to just blast Glowacki to the body, because Glowacki was so spooked and still trying to work out this how do I get around the jab situation. Now he's getting blasted to the sides with these devastating body shots that Lawrence Okolie is picking his spots and really kind of sitting on, putting his weight into. Yeah, it was an ugly sight when Okolie got in there with Glowacki. Finished him, knocked him out by the 6th round, and he's had one fight since against Dylan Prosovic, and he knocked him out in the 3rd round, another very outmatched opponent. So now Okolie is going to go against, I would say, probably maybe the 2nd best fighter that he's fought. Michal Cieslak has actually challenged for the title before, and that resulted in his only loss, and that came to Ilunga Jr. Makabu, who you guys probably know from being one of the guys who was kind of trotted out as a potential future opponent for Canelo Alvarez when Eddie Reynoso, Canelo's trainer, petitioned the WBC to try to allow Canelo to fight several divisions up and challenge Ilunga Makabu for his WBC Cruiserweight title. And Makabu just fought a few weeks ago in a fight that many thought that Makabu should have lost. This was against Dabiso Nkunu, and this was the 2nd time Makabu's fought Nkunu, and Makabu won. He stopped him the first time, but in this recent fight, he won via very questionable, close, I say very disputed decision win. But Michal Cieslak's only loss to this date is against Makabu, and that was via unanimous decision. Cieslak is a very heavy hitter, and he's ranked right now like in the top 8 to 10 by Ring Magazine. So he's highly touted. He was, winning a lot of his fights again via knockout, leading up to that WBC Cruiserweight Challenge against Makabu. So he was really building a reputation for himself. Michal Cieslak is out of Poland. They've got a pretty rich boxing heritage. He had picked up big knockout wins over Kalenga and Dorodula out of Nigeria. And then he challenged Ilunga Makabu in January of 2020. So this is just before the pandemic, and this is for the vacant WBC Cruiserweight belt. So when Makabu beat Cieslak, the belt was up for grabs, and that's how Makabu won his WBC Cruiserweight title. And this was I would say it was a competitive fight, but Makabu was several inches shorter, or he was 3 inches shorter, but he looked even shorter than that against Cieslak. But Makabu was able to just kind of get in after the first couple rounds, get in at will. He dropped Cieslak a couple times in the fight. Cieslak seemed to have a couple big mental lapses where Makabu kind of hit to, the belt line, and then Cieslak stopped the action, kind of looked away, and then he allowed Makabu to get off like 3 or 4 punches, and he dropped Cieslak with that combination because Cieslak was kind of sleeping at the wheel. Big time mental lapse, but Cieslak tried to, work his way back into the fight. But, Makabu, basically won several rounds against Cieslak, and that's how he won the unanimous decision. And this fight, by the way, was in the Congo. that's Makabu's hometown, so you can imagine how amped that crowd was for their fighter to be the Cruiserweight champion, or at least one of the Cruiserweight champions. So that is Cieslak's only loss. He's won 2 fights since that against lesser opponents, both via knockout. Again, Cieslak is very heavy-handed. He's an orthodox fighter. He's pretty, basic in terms of his approach. I mean, he's got a decent jab. He'll throw a nice right hand, throw hooks. He'll go to the body. Like, he's fighting a lot of shorter fighters, and when he fights taller fighters, he does invest to the body. So it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to make a commitment to try to get inside on Okolie, who's, again, going to have a rare height advantage over Cieslak. I'm going to be interested to see if Cieslak tries to let his hands go to Okolie's body. Okolie's a good mover. He keeps a pretty wide stance. Again, he's just killing you with the jabs, and then he's going to start softening you up with those jabs to then let his power punches go. Nice right hand. Nice, again, he'll blast you to the body. So it's tough for me to really carve out a path to victory for Cieslak here, because I feel like the type of fighter who's going to give Okolie problems is going to be somebody who could truly get on the inside, somebody who could kind of like stay low and then let his hands go to Okolie's body, because Okolie, again, is 6'5", nasty jab. So that's going to be the primary concern for Cieslak. I could just see it where if Cieslak doesn't hit Okolie with something hard in the first couple rounds and like rattle Okolie's cage, I could very easily see Okolie just totally taking over this fight with the jab and basically rendering Cieslak unable to really do much. Like, he might try to find 1 or 2 punch opportunities like most guys try once they figure out that they can't strategically navigate around that jab from the 6'5" Okolie. So, yeah, I think Cieslak is going to have all kinds of problems trying to close that distance, being, again, somebody who's used to having a height advantage, but instead being the shorter fighter, who's not only the shorter fighter, but they are the slower fighter. I don't think he lets his hands go as quickly as Okolie. Cieslak is kind of slow, I think, at throwing his punches. He'll throw kind of scooping shots, but sometimes when the fighter is like hurt or he's like kind of blinded them with something up top, he'll then let his hands go to the body. But if you're not able to get Okolie's respect at range, I don't really see what the opportunities are on being able to let your hands go to the body. Like, it's not like Cieslak has fast feet. I think he's, somewhat, I mean, he's got a little bounce in his feet early in the round, so maybe that's something that he has going for him. He could kind of bounce on his toes a bit, but in terms of effectively closing the distance, I mean, we'll see if he's able to kind of jump in and throw something hard. But I just see that if it's not working for him in the first couple rounds, I could see Okolie being in cruise control by the 4th, 5th, 6th round. And then it becomes a question of how much punishment is Cieslak willing to take. But I ultimately have Lawrence Okolie winning this one via, I would say, is it going to be mid-round or late stoppage? I don't think Cieslak is going to carry this thing out for 12 rounds. He did against Makabu, and, to his credit, he took a ton of shots. Makabu looked like he was more or less able to hit Cieslak at will, which, I mean, maybe his defense is somewhat underrated because he is keeping his hands up, but then when he gets back into a stance where he's ready to fight, he's dropping his hand. I don't see him being able to drop his hand without getting peppered by Okolie's jab here. Again, Makabu is 6 foot flat. Okolie is 6'5". Okolie's going to be the one dictating the terms of the exchanges. So with that, I mean, I see Cieslak kind of hitting a panic switch, maybe going for a few bombs in the early rounds. But look, it's going to get kind of bloody for Cieslak early if he's not able to solve that puzzle being Okolie's jab in the early rounds. But yeah, I have Okolie stopping Cieslak probably by like the 7th or 8th round. And hopefully they're able to work some magic out if Okolie is able to handle business here, to have Okolie either fight Makabu, who was actually promoted by Don King in his last fight. Hopefully they could get some, Matchroom Eddie Hearn, Don King collab going, and maybe we could get Okolie versus Makabu, or perhaps Okolie. Again, this is the dream match of the division, even though Mairis Breidis is now like in his mid-30s. I think he might be past his prime now, even though in his 2 fights ago where he beat Dorticos, who is like a top 4-ish fighter at cruiserweight right now. Mairis Breidis just beat him 2 fights ago. And the fight before that is when he stopped Glowacki, the same Glowacki who is still Okolie's biggest win. Mairis Breidis just stopped him in the 3rd round. So even though he might be past his absolute prime at 37, I thought he was like maybe 35, but damn, 37 years old for Breidis, I would still love to see Lawrence Okolie versus Mairis Breidis. But last I really heard from Breidis, he was more interested in fighting like Jake Paul. And I could get it, a 37-year-old. You've basically accomplished a ton. I'm sure you want to be able to cash out with as big a fight as possible. Maybe if he can't get his Jake Paul fight, which, why the hell would Jake Paul fight somebody as good as Mairis Breidis? Jake Paul has yet to fight somebody his own size, let alone arguably the best cruiserweight in boxing in Mairis Breidis. So I don't see Jake Paul versus Breidis anytime soon. So I hope that if it's not that Mairis Breidis would be open to fighting a title unification fight against Lawrence Okolie. And again, that's assuming Okolie gets past Michal Cieslak, which I expect him to via mid-round stoppage. But yeah, let me know what you think about Okolie versus Cieslak. Is this a step-up opponent? Like, would you say Cieslak at this stage is more dangerous than the version of Krzysztof Glowacki that we saw totally get dismantled and dominated by Lawrence Okolie? Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.